It's the World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us, Pierre Aski, who does the daily column on international affairs on French flagship public radio station France Inter. Thanks
Which is on strike at the moment.
Which is on strike.
Yes.
Some of the...
I must say.
All right, some... Okay, a strike at France Inter. We'll talk about that perhaps more. Rim Momtaz is with us as well, France correspondent for Politico.
Yeah, hi.
How are you?
Good,
Right.
yeah.
It's been a busy week. France 24 well represented from our Arabic language desk producer, Mohammed Salem.
How are you?
Sir?
I'm good.
I'm fine. How are you?
Me too.
Okay. And we always welcome visitors when they come in from out of town. Our Delhi correspondent, Mandakini Galat, is with us.
Yes, escaping the pollution.
Well, maybe we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
All right. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. A moonless night in the Sahel, a patrol on the trail of jihadi insurgents, and 2 helicopters that collide, 13 killed, France's worst single-day casualty toll since 1983. In the southeastern French garrison town of Gap, mountain rangers sing the Marseillaise to honor their fallen comrades, with similar tributes in the southwestern city of Pau, where the helicopter regiment is based.
I came to offer my condolences because I am a former soldier from the 5th Combat Helicopter Regiment. I left about 2 years ago, but unfortunately I knew some of those who died, so I'm very emotional today.
We're here as a gesture to the families and their children, and for France too.
For solidarity too, for fraternity, to remember the dead. They did not die for nothing.
You know, it's been 2 decades, Pierre Aski, since France got rid of the of military service, of compulsory military service. And next Monday, there's going to be this national tribute at the National Armory, Les Invalides. This is a reminder that there's a lot of French soldiers in very dangerous places.
Yes, it's a reminder that this country has been involved in permanent war outside its borders for the past decades, whether in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, or in sub-Saharan Africa. And this toll was really huge and provoked a shock in the country. But it's also raised questions about the strategy, about the political reasons for the presence. There's been a little bit of debate very soon after the announcement of the accident, because some politicians have raised the question of whether this presence was legitimate.
Too soon?
Probably too soon, because there's a time for mourning and there's a time for debate if you are a political leader, I suppose. But I think it was a good question, because these wars, and particularly, as you said, since we don't have military service anymore, these are voluntary recruits, so they are voluntary to go on war situations. There's no real public debate on the strategies, on the logic, on the commitment itself. We are a strange country where Parliament doesn't vote entry into war, contrary to other countries where you need to have parliamentary approval.
Is this considered a war, even? Because
well, whether you name it a war or not, you know, the Algerian War was never named a war until quite recently. It was called the events of Algeria. It is a war, obviously, and particularly when you have soldiers dying. It's the largest commitment of French troops outside the country at the moment, 4,500 soldiers. It was started on a very important moment, which was this jihadi column which was racing towards Bamako, the Malian capital, in 2013. And François Hollande, the president, stopped that and helped to recapture the whole of the country, which had fallen under the jihadi troops. But today, it seems that the task is a little bit helpless, and the French army, with 4,500 soldiers, is facing a region which is as big as Europe, and that's really one of the issues that is at stake.
Rim Momtaz?
So what was very interesting beyond the tragedy, and it's a really big tragedy, I think, for France. 13 soldiers in one go. But what's interesting is yesterday, President Macron basically said that they're looking at completely sort of rethinking the mission in Mali. And clearly he wants much more involvement by European allies in particular.
He was speaking in the company of the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg.
Exactly.
And he's been egging on other European nations to... There are European soldiers present right now in Mali and in the Sahel, but they're not in active combat.
So a couple, missions. About 4 or 5 European allies are part of this mission. They're largely in a support function. They're not exactly in a sort of combat position with the French. I mean, the French are obviously the ones who are in the lead. There's a very big logistical and intelligence assist from the US. But the point that Macron is now making is that the fight that France is fighting in sub-Saharan Africa is to maintain the security and preserve the security of Europe, and that as such, more Europeans need to kind of step up. And it's part of his whole pitch for more European defense. It's part of his pitch for an overhaul, like a real strategic rethink of NATO, nothing less. Because, again, yesterday he said, actually today, he used the word enemy, but perhaps a better word in the context of NATO would be adversary of NATO, is terrorism, and it's not Russia and it's not China, which is a real substantive shift.
How's it going to play next week in London? London has just been hit by a terror attack, but on the other hand, where a lot of the NATO partners not taking kindly to his brain death comment about how NATO has lost its way a bit.
I think that summit is going to be a bonfire, honestly. Everything we're hearing is extremely critical of the French president's position. And there's one thing that is, I think, very tricky about the pitch he's making right now, which is how do you define terrorism among 29 allies who do not agree on that definition, on which groups are terrorists, especially, obviously, we're thinking about Turkey, but not just Turkey.
Yeah, Turkey, whose president has said that Macron has to manage his own brain death.
Yep.
Yes. But it's interesting, as you point out, that the events in Mali just intruded in that growing debate about NATO strategy, European defense, and Macron is himself playing a kind of interaction between both events to show that Europe's security is at stake in the Sahel region, and that Europe should take its own fate into its own hands. So he's been, in a way, using this tragedy in a very, very special political context.
But Mohammed Salem, you do have NATO, which has part of its mission, which is been combating terrorism when it comes to Syria and Iraq, obviously in Afghanistan as well. Why not the Sahel?
I don't know why they are so reluctant to get involved in Sahel. I don't know, maybe because they consider it as a French zone. The influence of France there is huge, as we know. But what really struck me about this...
Because there is the U.S. there. They have that drone base just outside of Niamey, the capital of Niger.
Yeah. But what really struck me about this accident is that how come it happened, actually? I mean, it's really, really weird that 2 helicopters crashed like that. I know that, for example, the chief of staff of the army, Lecointre, he said that it was an accident. Of course, he denied all what the Islamic State said about like shooting at the helicopters and all that. But was the weather bad? We know very little about how the circumstances of this accident and this.
Well, the official explanation is that it was a moonless night. It made the mission more complicated because they're using night vision goggles.
Yeah, but they're still investigating, and apparently we're going to get the results later on. And as you were saying, there's time for mourning and time for political action or political commands. But how come this accident happened with the French army that's supposed to be very well trained? That was in a combating mission, but we don't know why is it that secretive in a way, that mission in Mali.
All right, in the northern city of Gao in Mali, they still remember 2013 when the French chased out the jihadists, even though some say, in view of the spike in insurgent attacks recently, some there arguing that the French have become ineffective.
Au début, c'était vraiment At first, the French army was valued by Malians. But today, some Malians denounce the intervention. But with regards to the accident, we sympathize with their pain. These are people who have come to help Mali, who have fallen for Mali, and we truly sympathize with their pain.
Mali and throughout Africa, there's even critics who claim over social media that the French operation's a scramble for newfound oil and other raw materials. The French Army Chief of Staff responded on sister station Radio France International.
I can't stand these rumors and false allegations anymore. All they do is cause terrible damage to public opinion in the countries where we are there to help.
Évidemment, ça n'est pas le sens de notre action.
Obviously, this is not the point of our actions. French soldiers are in Mali to improve security in the region, which in turn increases security and stability in France as well as in Europe. It is the stability of the whole of Sahelian Africa and West Africa that is at stake today.
Et de toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest à terminaison qui est en jeu aujourd'hui.
Manzaki Gallut, your reaction to those remarks?
Well, you tend to forget from the outside what a large presence France has in Mali. I mean, with all the conflicts that are going on in the world, you forget. And I think this particular tragedy is really raising questions about France's presence in Mali. But also, like Mohammed said, I understand this is a time for mourning, but there are some very real questions on strategy here. How did this accident happen? Such a large death toll. This is one of the most well-trained, technologically advanced armies in the world. So what's really going on here?
You know, there's one thing we tend to forget, and the remark of this Malian man was reminded me, is how quickly a country can go from liberator to occupier. I mean, Afghanistan was a very good case where the armies that toppled the Taliban regime were welcomed as liberators in Kabul and have become, with time, with an absence of visible strategy, with an absence of results, with also the contradictions of counterinsurgency strategies, they have become, were seen as occupiers. And that's the risk that the French have, particularly being the former colonial power. And just one point to the question why the Europeans are not more present. For a long time, France didn't want anyone to come in West Africa. I mean, especially not the Brits, who are now there with...
But that's been finished for 20 years, Pierre. Now you have the British and the French who work very closely in tandem in West Africa.
Yes, but I think in Europe, Africa is considered the French backyard. It's supposed to be French territory and not
all Africa.
No, West Africa, and particularly the French-speaking African countries. And so the Europeans have been very reluctant to go in what could be seen as neo-colonial wars. And that's where, at the moment, France is trying to show, no, it's not a neo-colonial war, we're fighting for Europe.
What you just said, I think, is actually the crux of the matter that Macron is going to have to deal with when he goes to NATO next week. You spoke about Afghanistan. In Mali, it's the same, right? It's terrorism. They're fighting terrorism. Well, terrorism is nebulous. It is not an actor that you can very easily define. You can't point your finger at it. It moves among the population. It is very tricky. And as such, defining a clear-cut narrative and defining goals, the goalposts keeps shifting when you're fighting terrorism.
It was easy with the caliphate because they had a territory, and it was easy to have a goal, which was to liberate that territory.
Whereas when you're fighting against non-state actors in asymmetrical warfare, the goalpost keeps shifting, and so it becomes harder and harder for the local population to be like, well, why are you still here? What are you exactly trying to do?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the heart of one of the difficulties of this shift that Macron is trying to do with NATO.
Yeah, and with these insurgent attacks, we saw it with those 49 Malian soldiers killed at the start of the month. Insurgents who seemed to appear out of nowhere and then disappeared after that massacre. There's also been killings of civilians in Burkina Faso. We'll continue to follow, of course, this story. It was the week where the President of the United States scored points with protesters in Hong Kong. They waved American flags Thursday at a Thanksgiving rally, that's what they called it, after the president, albeit reluctantly it seems, signed a bipartisan measure by Congress that raises the specter of sanctions should Beijing crack down too hard. And there, too, that call for Europe to do more.
I also want other European countries, especially Germany and EU, to stand against China, because so far I don't think they stand firm against China.
They're not standing firm. By the way, Mumtaz, this Friday, there was a rally outside the British consulate in Hong Kong.
You know, it's interesting. I was with Macron during his official visit to China, and this issue of Hong Kong came up, and he was timid, to put it mildly. You know, the position on Hong Kong right now is that it has to be sort of the European position, and the Europeans have been, you know, their pronouncements on it have been not very sort of forthright and clear. Perhaps only Merkel kind of went out of her way to say something when she was there.
The problem, and that's where these pictures were very, very eloquent, is that the youth of Hong Kong thinks that Trump or maybe Europe one day will save them from China, and that's impossible, because it is part of China, and it's not, you know, nobody's going to go to war to take Hong Kong out of China. And Trump said the truth of his mind in his first tweet when the demonstration started in June. He said, this is a domestic matter for China, and I trust my friend Xi Jinping to do what is needed. Yeah. Then he had to back down because he had a lot of pressure from Congress, including from Republicans who were outraged. But the truth of the matter is that despite this law and despite whatever the Europeans will say, nobody is going to come to the rescue of the youth in Hong Kong.
Trump has also said that this law infringes on his constitutional prerogative to enforce foreign policy, sort of indicating that he might not enforce all the provisions of these sanctions. And then China's response is fairly interesting. There's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of bluster, but again, they don't seem very worried about it. So it does look like he had to sign this because it had, you know, near unanimous support in both the houses. And
there was only one senator who didn't vote for it.
Exactly. So I'm not sure whether it means very much beyond the symbolic gesture of saying, okay, I stand with Hong Kong, but I also stand with President Jinping, which is exactly what he said.
We're going to have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.